Hey, everybody, we are live. Welcome to the Funny Shrink Podcast. I am Mike Cateo, and this is my lovely co host, Frank King.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So, how you been, Frank?
Mike, I've been busy. I'm working on an online course, how to get a TEDx, how to land a TEDx with a company called Speakerflow, and I'm busy doing something else. Oh yeah, I've got to record the second book of Guts, Grit, and the Grind. I got to read the third book before it goes to the publisher in its final draft. So it's gonna be a busy weekend. How about you?
Cool. I'm doing research for my first course tomorrow, and then I'm gonna start shooting my first course on Sunday, and hopefully that'll be up. Speaking of my course, this is where I met our next uh, guest. I met him on the membership site course I'm doing, and he is a great guy. He's a neuroscientist who focuses on brain injuries and Alzheimer's, and he's got a lot of great information about neuroscience, neurobiology, neuro. I don't know. So let's bring him on, Dr. Shyam Seetharaman. He's probably going to correct me with his name. Shyam, what's up, man?
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on, you guys. I really appreciate it. Like Mike said, I'm Dr. Shyam Seetharaman. So I'm a professor, I'm a neuroscientist, I'm a health coach, a life coach, and a personal trainer. And like Mike said, I'm focused on traumatic brain injury. My research that I've published has been on cognitive aging and progressive neurocognitive disorders, as well as acute and chronic stress effects on brain behavior and physiology. So I'm a research member of in the VA system. So I've studied PTSD and trauma and brain effects and stuff like that.
I hear music.
Sorry.
That's, something's wrong with my neurobiology.
You sound very smart.
Well, that's part of it, right? It's like, I had a friend once that never went skiing, had never been skiing before. And I was like, all you got to do is wear the gear and just trick people into thinking you're a skier. So there you go.
Yeah,
that's right. I tell people I'm a surfer.
Yeah.
I wear the gear. I follow my ass often. So we are excited to have you. I'm excited to learn more about you and what you do, what you're planning to do. I know you have a lot of exciting things coming up. So, what got you into neuroscience?
Yeah, really interesting questions. So my background is in engineering. So my undergraduate degree is in engineering. So I come from a math and science background, and what I figured out very quickly is that I love theory. So physics is one of my favorite subjects. I'm a math person. I'm a science theory person. But when it came to like actually practicing engineering, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So long story short, I quit my engineering career. I went back to school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then serendipitously, I started doing research with a neuroscientist, and I was in a fear lab. And I never really thought about the emotion of fear on any deep level until I started working in that lab. So interestingly,
I lose you guys. I lost you guys.
Hey, Dr. Shyam, Mike lost us, I think. It's just you and me, Daddy.
Okay.
So you're in the lab.
Yeah, so I started doing research with a neuroscientist, and he was an expert in fear. And I had never really thought about fear in that deep of a way before. And I was just fascinated by it. For instance, why fear is an important emotion, why fear is necessary. Fear, it's like if you were never able to generate fear, that emotion, you would not live very long. You wouldn't survive. Fear is an emotion that keeps you alive. It's a survival built-in kind of thing. So interestingly, in that lab, we studied spider phobics. So we studied people that were off the charts afraid of spiders, and we exposed them to spiders. So we brought live spiders into the lab.
Nice.
And, exposure therapied them. And this study is published. And what was interesting is, and again, the reason I'm explaining this is to give you the answer of why I became interested in this field. So what we did in that study was study superstitious conditioning. So another area of curiosity I had was, why are people superstitious? Why do people engage in superstitious behaviors? You know, athletes are notorious for this, and so forth. And so what we did was put these spiders in this room with these people that are deathly afraid of spiders, and gave them a keypad, and said that, and we also showed them pictures of spiders on the computer. And so what we, long story short, we told them, if you can find a code on this keypad, it'll make the spiders go away. Whereas this keypad was not hooked up to anything. It just didn't do anything. They didn't know that. And what we found was that people that were more afraid of spiders, they believed that they had found the code to make the spiders go away. Yeah. So what you find is that things like the development of superstitions, it's an artificial way of gaining control over a stressful or a chaotic situation. And then, we did brain scans on them. We took blood samples, measured their stress hormones and stuff like that. So that was my foundation, where I really started becoming fascinated with mind-body connection. So not only do I study, so I don't just sit there and look at brain tissue and brain scans. I'm interested in behavior. So how does what's going on in your head, how does that translate to how you behave as a person? And how does it change your physiology, right? And that was kind of my foundation. So then I branched off in graduate school and really started studying acute and chronic stress in a deep neurobiological fashion, as well as fear. And then I became interested in things like nutrition, which we can talk about here also.
That's crazy. So so my sister is really afraid of spiders. Did you expose those people to spiders like I did? I would just throw spiders at her.
Yeah. Well, so our particular variation was showing them pictures of spiders. We did have one group that had a spider in a box, spiders in a glass box, and you put them in the room with the spider and close the door. And, if you're phobic, if you have a clinical phobia of anything, even the thought of that stimulus causes fear, let alone seeing it. So exposure therapy, it doesn't work for everyone. So I've done similar thing with people that are acrophobic, so people that are afraid of heights. Mm-hmm. And what you do there is, there's a lot of studies like this. You expose them to virtual heights. So you have a virtual reality helmet on them, and they think, and it gives them the illusion that they're like high up, like the top floor of a building. And then What you can do is manipulate the floor there. You start them at a low floor, and then manipulate the floor, and then eventually take them to real life heights. It doesn't work for everyone. So if you're a good clinician, you're going to see what's working for your client and what's not.
I believe that religion is a placebo for stress relief. I believe it's a way to control, or at least have something to hang on to in an uncontrolled environment.
Yeah, it's like this whole idea of artificial creation of control. It goes hand in hand. You can make the argument it goes hand in hand with topics like escapism, right? And certainly people. You could argue people use religion as escapism, as an avenue of channeling some sense of control over this chaos that they feel. People use so it doesn't have to be, when you say escapism, people automatically jump to, alcohol, drugs, stuff like that. But I would argue in myself that I probably use fitness as a source of escapism to generate some sense of control over the stress and anxiety I have in my life, right?
Oh, I bodybuild, and I've said this more than once. The great thing about the gym is, in a world that's uncertain, a 25-pound dumbbell weighs 25 pounds no matter where you are in the world. I mean, maybe kilograms. Machines are roughly the same, may have a different nameplate, but walking into a gym, it feels it's very comfortable. It's because you're in control, if that makes sense of the.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you a really interesting study. So my PhD is in humans, but my foundation is in rats. I'm a rat person. So I've dealt a lot with rats.
Yeah, I've got an attorney as well.
Yeah, I dealt a lot with rats. So there's really, and here, just a short preface, you can learn a lot from rats. Interestingly, the neurochemistry of a rat brain is very similar to a human brain. Of course, it's a lot smaller, so their capacity is a lot less, but their general neurochemistry is very similar to humans. So that's one of the, plus they're cheap is the other reason people study rats. But so anyways, you get these rats and you put them in a cage and you shock them, right? And if they press a lever, the shock goes away. So in other words, they have control over the stressor. You get another group of rats, you put them in there, and they have no control over the shock. The shock's just intermittent. And you take them out, you cut them open, look at their brains, look at their physiology, look at their organs. And the rats that have control over the stressor, they're just so much better. They're less stressed. So there's this intimate connection between control and stress. So as your control goes up, your stress goes down, and vice versa. It's an inverse relationship.
Yeah, I think
it's Frank's photo shoot. Look at that.
It's I was getting ready for a natural bodybuilding contest last February when it was still on. But yeah, not only can I control in the gym, but I'm on the keto diet, so I'm very particular about what I eat. Mm-hmm. And I do intermittent fasting. I eat about every 20 to 22 hours. So again, something I can control in a healthy fashion.
Correct. Now, what's interesting is that if you look in the diagnostic manual of mental disorders, well, there's been a little bit of a shift in categorizing eating disorders as a subset of anxiety disorders. So you can take what you just said and people, I mean, it can become debilitating, right? It can become. Yeah. So that's kind of what things like obsessive compulsive disorder are, or eating disorders, where people feel such a sense of chaos and disarray that they hyper focus on things like food or self-injurious behaviors. Right? I can control what happens to my body. If I feel that is the only thing on the planet and everything's crashing down around me, well, it can lead to some maladaptive behaviors.
Well, in Oregon, we have right to die or death with dignity. And they found, I can't remember what the study was or who did it, but they found that people who had control over their end lived longer and more and better lives, knowing that they could when they were ready.
Yeah.
Same thing with morphine. When my mom was sick with cancer and a great deal of pain, they'd only give her a morphine shot every 4 hours. Mm-hmm. They decided to give the patient control over the morphine with a button. And they found the patients used less morphine because they knew they were in charge. So they said, I think I can take it a little longer. I think I can take it, and so they ended up using less, even though they were in control. They used less because of that. That's it.
It's really fascinating. I call it the lucky T-shirt effect, right? So you got a baseball player that wears a lucky red T-shirt and goes out and goes 4 for 5 with 3 home runs. So if you don't know baseball, that's pretty good. That's like a good day, right? And so from that point forward, he deems this shirt as his lucky shirt. Well, you can make the argument that the t-shirt does nothing. But if you think it does, that's what matters, right? That's how powerful your brain is. If you think something is important, you can make it important.
Well, that was the reason that I got the idea that a religion was a placebo, a very powerful placebo, from Seth Godin. He goes, look, it's a placebo. If you firmly believe that it works, like any good placebo, chances are it'll work. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the opposite's true too. There's studies on voodoo death. So there's people that have this strong belief in voodoo and curses. There's subcultures within the country that have this belief, right? So you get these people that have been cursed by their leader or whoever, and these people are cursed to die. I curse you to death. And they drop dead.
Oh my God.
They die. And you could argue the curse does nothing. But if you believe it does, it becomes so stressful to your body, breaks down your immune system, and they die.
Well, and that's
Those
why
beliefs are crazy powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why as an atheist, I've got no problem with religion. If you firmly believe that, if it does good for you, if it works for you, by God, more power to you. I think I find it very medieval and hard to believe anybody still is that superstitious, but they're.
Well, like Mike, like we've been talking about in you mentioned the membership fix class. That's why things like visualization and manifestation of goals can be very powerful, because if you believe something so strongly, you can make it happen because your brain is just so powerful.
Yeah, my mom said when I was very young, and repeated it many times, you can do anything you put your mind to.
Yeah.
I believe it. I believe wholeheartedly, like, manifestation is a thing.
Yeah.
And it's important to keep that part of your brain going, because I think as like I'm a therapist, I'm a social worker. I think as if we have trauma, if we believe we can deal with that trauma in a different way, in a better way, and not succumb to it, that helps us get through it. Like, I use laughter to get me through really tough situations. I use humor.
Right.
And so I'm interested in learning Dr. Shyam. I think I'm going to call you that from now on when we're on call. Dr. Shyam.
Sounds good.
I think when that humor helps change the brain, laughter helps change the brain. Do you know of anything like that, or how the response is to trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. So, anything. So I published this in Brain and Behavior, like in the journal Brain and Behavior, like 3 years ago. It's not exactly the same. But I'm gonna branch off to what you're saying. So, basically, what you find in humans is that traumatized individuals greatly benefit from environmental and social complexity. So if you think about humor and laughter as from a philosophical standpoint, right? Laughter and humor it's a very complex thing, right? It's not very straightforward. It introduces complexity into your life in a good way, right? So basically what I found in my study was, this is in rats, right? But you can translate this, you find the same thing in humans. So you get these rats, you traumatize them. Do you want to hear how I did it or not?
Sure, why not?
So you get these rats.
You move their cheese.
I wish it was that easy for them. So you get these rats and you put them in a room with a cat.
Oh.
So cats are natural predators of rats, and they can sense it. So you do the same thing with a dog and you don't get the stress response. They know there's something specific about cats, right? Wow. So you put a cat into the room and they're super stressed. They're traumatized. The rats are in a little chamber, so they can't be bitten. They can't be scratched. It's just visual. olfactory and auditory perceptions of the cat. So anyways, so get these rats out, put them in with the cat, you take them out, and they're very stressed. So they have memory impairment, stress hormones through the roof. You can do all these tests on them. And then what I did was took all these traumatized rats and gave them group therapy. So I took all these traumatized rats, put them in this really big ferret cage with a bunch of toys in there, and they can run around, they can socialize, they're rolling over each other, they're running up and down these things. I did that for like a month, measured them again, and they recovered, compared to rats that were isolated after trauma. Right? So, and you see the same thing in humans, is that when you introduce environmental and social complexity, people recover. And the reason is, here's the biological reason. So there's a area of your brain in the limbic system called the amygdala, which you guys probably heard of. So the amygdala is your emotional center. And then there's your frontal lobe. Your frontal lobe is your executive functioning. So that's your higher level thinking, abstract thinking, organization, sequencing, logic, that kind of stuff, right? So what happens is, so if this is your amygdala and this is your prefrontal cortex, which is a sub area of the frontal lobe. Okay, so you had amygdala, prefrontal cortex. So what happens is at baseline, your amygdala wants to fire. So that's why, like, when you're a little kid, little kids are really emotional. Their emotions are all over the place because their frontal lobes are not fully developed. Okay, because your amygdala wants to fire. What frontal lobe does is inhibits amygdala, right? Holds it in check. So that's why as your brain matures, you have more control, in theory, over your emotions. Because as your frontal lobe matures, you have more control over amygdala function, right? So anything that you can do, but what trauma does is it impairs frontal lobe. So if you got an impairment of this guy, suddenly you let loose that grip and your amygdala starts to be hyperactive. So that's why victims of trauma, often they have dysregulated emotions. They kind of like a little kid, right? They go on these emotional roller coasters. So a part of non-pharmacological, and pharmacological intervention is to strengthen frontal lobe activity. So that's what social and environmental complexity does, is you can look at, so there's parts of brain cells called dendrites. So dendrites are these branch-like structures that basically have to do with synaptic strength. So if you can increase synaptic strength in a brain structure, then that means that brain structure is going to operate more efficiently and more strongly. So environmental and social complexity increase dendritic branching in your frontal lobe, thereby increasing more control over the amygdala. So things like laughter and humor, it goes hand in hand with positive social complexity, right? And it's very complicated. There's neurotransmitter activity, dopamine response, serotonin response, stuff like that. But in general, if you're increasing frontal lobe control over amygdala. So if you think about laughter and humor as a component of social complexity, well, over time, what you're doing is gaining control over your emotional stability.
Wow.
So on the there was a story today in Inverse magazine that they did some genetic research and they found the genes for depression and those for intelligence overlapped. And I guess they found that people with depression can be more intelligent.
Well, yeah. So here's the thing. So your brain is, so what I tell my students and what I tell my clients is that your brain works in concert. It's a good way to think about it. You ever been to like a symphony or an orchestra, right? There's different, I'm not a music person, so I'm going to like butcher this, but so there's people that blow horns, there's people that hit drums, there's like different sections, right? And each section is responsible for a particular type of sound.
Right.
However, the entire orchestra is needed to work in concert to produce the piece properly. So if your horn section's off, well, that's only one part of the orchestra, but it throws off the entire thing, right? So your brain is a balance between specificity and working in concert. Okay, so the reason I'm saying that is, so there's for example, there's brain areas that are important for processing guilt. There's brain areas that are that, and it all branches off from amygdala, but so there's brain areas that are specific for, intelligence, for anger, for all this stuff. So going off of what Frank said, and what you find is that, like, people, brain post-mortem studies of sociopaths, serial killers, what you find is really high level frontal lobe development. So they're very logical, they're very methodical. You could argue very intelligent, but the brain areas that process things like risk and guilt are very underdeveloped. So you think about it, if you're super intelligent, but you are not able to feel guilty, well, that's a recipe for a dangerous person.
Yeah.
Right? Because you know how to do something, but you don't feel bad for doing it.
You know, no empathy.
Empathy, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I did my third TED Talk was called Mental with Benefits, the Evolutionary Advantages of Mental Illness. And I came up with it because everybody I met who was mentally ill, who wasn't completely dysfunctional, seemed to have some kind of superpower. Yeah. Great comic, singer, artist, writer. And I came to believe, and I said this in my, what if those of us living with a mental illness are not living with a genetic mutation, but an amazing evolutionary adaptation? Mm-hmm. I believe I'm not broken. I was made this way. And I believe that my depression and chronic suicidal ideation is simply the flip side of my imagination, creativity, comedic ability.
Gosh, you're so right. You're so right. Our whole view of mental illness, it's getting better. It's better than it was 30 years ago. But there's a long way to go.
What I also hear Frank saying is, like, Frank, you're saying because you're depressed, you're a genius? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, I'm highly, well, Dr. Shyam, my family all live with one mental illness or another, all on one psychotropic. I mean, nuttier than a squirrel turd, but all are relatively intelligent. And the problem they mentioned in the study or in the abstract or whatever, one of the problems with really intelligent people who are depressed is they believe they can think their way out of it. Whereas somebody wrote me and said, no, the trick is to feel your way out of it, not think your way out of it, which I thought, man, there's a TED Talk.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've done talks on, not TED Talks, but lectures on things like ADHD. Mm-hmm. And, and ADHD is really misunderstood. And, you talk to people with ADHD and they're typically pretty intelligent. Mm-hmm. They're very articulate. One of the misnomers about ADHD is that they can't pay attention. Well, that's not true. They actually hyper focus. They actually pay too much attention.
Yeah.
Especially if it's something they're interested in. Then they really hyper focus at the expense, perhaps, of other things. And then people misinterpret that as they can't pay attention. Well, that's not actually true. They're paying more attention, right? And so, I've heard talks of people that have ADHD, and they're just like, in general, there has to be a shift in terms of all mental illness on what you were saying, Frank. Like, it's not thinking about it as a disability, but thinking about it as a different way of thinking, a different way that your brain is processing information.
Yeah, there's one of the TED Talks I'm pitching is depressive realism. There is some science, not a lot, that people with depression see the world more clearly than people who are neurotypical and maybe looking at it through rose-tinted glasses. Like they see the way they want to see it. Yeah. So the idea being that if we can reframe depression from a disability to this ability to see the world more clearly. Yeah. It just keeps, because I kept meeting people who are really talented But on ADHD, I think I have a little touch of that because my wife will tell you if I get focused on something, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I can lose an hour like that.
Yeah.
But the focus there, but she can be standing 15 feet behind me yelling my name, and I want, the input's going in, but it's just apparently not getting anywhere. A question about ADHD. I've got a friend who deals with trauma, she's a therapist, a lot of trauma work. And she said, part of the problem with ADHD is it could be actually childhood trauma that presents with the symptoms of ADHD. So, but it's easier to throw medication at a young person than it is that she said, I don't know what point in American psychology or in psychology they stopped treating the soul and simply treating the symptoms rather than dig in and find out why they're having this.
It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. Go ahead, Mike.
I have a funny. So someone said on Facebook, wrote so true about what you're saying about people with ADHD. When I was a kid, the bus driver on my bus route used to tell me, you could give aspirin a headache. Like I was one of those kids who constantly talked, always running a mile a minute. And when I was an adult, I went on ADHD medication. And I told my mother once, and she goes, you don't have ADHD. I go, well, remember when I was little and I used to bounce off the walls and always be running around, and I swear to God, this was her response. Yeah, but the car accident really slowed you down.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What's hilarious to me is my mom was dead serious. Like,
yeah.
Before my car accident, I was out of control. After you took away my ability to walk, it was really easy to manage me. So,
yeah, it was an accident.
Well, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. The thing is, like with ADHD medications, let's take Adderall, for example. Like, there's a lot of studies showing that Adderall is effective. It does work. But the thing is that there's a lot of people running around, kids especially, that are on Adderall that do not have ADHD.
right.
So if you have it, it works. The problem is there's so many people that are on it that don't have it. And then it's not good for you, right? It puts you at risk for other things later on. And I'll tell you the second issue between you and me and whoever else is listening. The other issue is, and I don't know it's a systemic issue, is that honestly, you got these teachers that think they're psychiatrists.
Right.
And they haven't even taken my class. They haven't even taken my Psych 101 class, let alone have a psychiatry degree. So you got and they're in a tough position. They're in a very tough position. You got a first grade teacher that's just observing this kid and being like, hey, they got ADHD. He needs to go on Adderall. And it's like, it's a huge issue. You got these people that are like diagnosing kids that have no business diagnosing anyone.
Yeah, it happened to me in high school. We had a student teacher and Mr. Fry, and he put on my monthly or quarterly, whatever the report was, my permanent record. He put, he's hyperactive. And my mother saw it and came to the school and had a meeting with him and said, okay, now, what qualifies you? Because, you put in your permanent record, it's going to follow you forever.
Yeah.
You're labeled that way. And so that, he just, like I said, he just figured because I thought about writing a book called Ritalin Killed the Class Clown. Because every comic I know is a class clown. If we're drugging them into oblivion, there's, can I ask you a brain question? And see if Mike has this happen to him. I can remember the first time I was on stage when I realized that my mind was running on two tracks. I'm watching somebody in the audience. He's got an ugly sweater on, so I'm thinking I'm going to him next. And it occurred to me, I'm still talking. I'm still in the middle of the joke. Where the hell am I? Is it coming? And I was still talking. So it was like, and then when I talk to somebody, oftentimes I look off to the left and up. And somebody complained to my boss when I worked in radio, he's not paying attention to me. He's looking over my left shoulder. And my boss knew me well enough. He goes, no, he's paying, his focus on you is serious, because what's happening is he's listening to you, but when he's looking off to the left, he's processing what you're saying, comparing it to what else he's got in his head that, falls into the same, you know what I mean? He listens to you more than the average person is listening to.
Yeah.
So is it possible there's something in the brain that, we can actually run on two tracks? Or is
before you answer, Shyam, like when I perform, I'm sorry, Dr. Shyam. When I'm on stage, comics are the only people I know who think faster than anyone else in the room. Like I've said to people, when I'm up on stage, I'm doing three things at once. I'm thinking about the joke I'm telling. I'm making sure the wording's right. I'm thinking about the next joke I'm going to tell. I'm thinking about what that joke that I just told, how it didn't go right, and I need to change that in my next act. And I'm watching the audience, scanning for cues or who hates it or who's losing interest. And all while doing that, I'm trying to be funny. And that's why I suck.
So let me ask both of you guys a question. So what you just described there is like you're doing all these things at the same time while trying to be funny and blah, blah, blah. So I want you to think about how has that process that you just described, has there been an evolution in that process? So for example, the first time you were ever on stage compared to now, like, was it like that from day one, or has it changed?
I didn't realize it until several months into my comedy career that was happening. It may have been happening, but I was not consciously aware until I'm thinking about something else, and I'm terrified that that am I still telling this? That joke is just pronouncing the words correctly, because it was it seemed like I was observing myself from inside, and so I had to tune back into the joke to see if it was coming out right. Yeah, and I think it's evolved over time. And people ask me, go ahead.
I think it's a muscle, right? I think I've always had it. It's an innate ability. But the more I got up on stage, the more that muscle was developed. Because the first time I went on stage, I was talking fast and I was watching the crowd and I was doing this. But I was not as skilled or as honed as I am now at doing it. I also do this in my private practice. What you were saying, Frank, like someone will be talking to me and I'll be thinking in my head, okay, this is what I respond. And I'll look off to the left. It's always the left too. I'll look above their head on the left and gather my thoughts and then start talking. And people are like, what are you looking at? You've been staring at the same spot for 10 minutes. I'm like,
yeah, that's interesting. The reason I'm asking is because when you said that, the first thing I thought of was when I teach. So I've been teaching for a while, like over 10 years, right? And, sometimes I teach the same class over and over again. So the first time that I teach a class, it's deliberate. It's more conscious. I have to think more about what I'm saying, about the material. But as I say it over and over and over again, you kind of get to this autopilot stage where it's like you're so used to being in this is your comfort zone that you can go 7 different ways and still get the message across and still accomplish what you set out to, because there's a shift, right? So there's 2 types of neurological processing. There's different terms for it, but one of the terms I'm going to use are top-down versus bottom-up processing. So when you're not as practiced at something, you're a bottom-up processor. You're very deliberate. Anything. When you're first learning to tie your shoes, when you're first learning to ride your bike, you're very slow. You ever seen a little? Here's a good thing. Get a little kid and try to explain to them in words how to ride a bicycle. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. How do you explain to somebody verbally how to ride a bicycle? Because you just know how to do it. You just do it, right? How do you explain verbally the concept of balance? It's very hard, right? So when you're first learning to ride a bike, you're very deliberate. You're very bottom up. You have to focus. They'll squint their little face and like you have to really focus. But once you do it, now you as an adult, you may not have ridden a bicycle for years. You get on a bicycle, it might take you a few minutes, but you start riding.
You know, I have a joke in my act. Like I don't do it. I left stand up for like 7 or 9 years, and then I went back. And the joke was, you know, I'm back to doing stand up, and I always thought, well, what if I don't do as well? And then I thought, well, they say it's like riding a bike, but I can't really ride a bike. So I say it's a lot like, then I insert something really inappropriate. and I go, because I've done that before.
Yeah. Well, and I read a book years ago, Doctor, on the inner game of tennis. And he suggested that if you teach somebody tennis, you don't tell them how to hit a tennis ball. You show them how to hit a tennis ball. And people have seen, if you watch tennis, your brain has absorbed how you hit a tennis ball. So you're sort of hardwired for it. So when I was teaching kids to swim at the boys club, I wouldn't say a word. I go, just watch me go back and forth doing the Australian crawl, you know, several laps. And then I'd have them get in. And it was a relatively good approximation of what I had done without saying a word.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And you just perfectly given a great example of a system of cells that we have called mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are thought to be very uniquely human. There is some evidence from primates and actually some types of birds that have these. So mirror neurons give us the relatively unique ability to emulate someone of our own species. So mirror neurons are a subset of your motor cortex. So if I'm at the park and we're playing catch and you're way across and I'm throwing you a ball, well, for me to look at you, aim and fire, my motor cortex has to coordinate my senses, my motor neurons, they all have to do that, right? But what's interesting is a subset of your motor cortex will also fire if I watch someone else throw a ball. So it's almost like your brain is putting yourself in that situation. And that's why we're able to learn via observation. You think about it this way. You look at like a polar bear and how many years, millions of years it took that polar bear to develop that fur to survive that climate. Well, you got a human kid that watches his dad go kill a polar bear, skin its fur, and make a coat out of it. So the thing that it took the polar bear millions of years to learn, the human learns it in like a minute. Right? So like our ability to emulate someone else of our own species is very, very unique. And that all, I can talk about this for days. That all ties into empathy, dysfunctions in that, our risk factor for autism. You know, there's all kinds of things.
Well, and I also read The Inner Game of Golf, and it's Timothy Galway. The premise of the book basically is you need to you know how to hit a golf ball because you're seeing golf over and over. If you shut down the critical part of your brain, the part that, you know that's you can't play golf. You don't know what you're doing, you know, and you don't read a book and says, you know, you hold the club like you're holding a bird, and you keep your head down and whatever. So I went and take my first golf lesson after reading the book, and he has you play a game where all you're doing is looking at the ball, you swing the club, and when the ball strikes the club, your job is to say hit. So you're watching the ball, so when the ball strikes the club, you say hit. So you're focused on the ball, which keeps your head down naturally, by the way. So I took my first swing, and he goes, "Dear God, how long have you been playing golf?" I said, "This is my first lesson, but not the first lesson in my brain." My mom used to watch golf every weekend, professional golf, and I'd sit right next to her because that was the kind of thing we did together. And I mean, I can't tell you how many rounds of golf I've watched.
Yeah.
And apparently my brain was sucking it in. One last question for you about comedy. Every now and then I'll have somebody, and I'm sure this happened to Mike too, where somebody says something and you fire something back, just, bang. And I had a woman one night, she got thrown out. She's on her way out the door. She turns back to me. She must have heard something sounded like her name because drunks are voice activated. And she yelled out, F you. And I didn't even, I just said, not even for practice. And people came up afterwards and go, how do you think that up? And I said, honestly, I didn't hear it or think it until you heard it. I have no idea where it came from. It just came screaming out of the back of my head. I didn't consciously think, okay, here's what I'm going to say.
There's so many lines as comics that come up while we're performing where I'm like, oh my God, I got to keep that in my act. It's hilarious. But it was something that just happened. We've been talking for a while, and I want to, we're going to have to, this is the therapist in me. I'm horrible at ending phone conversations with people, but I'm good at wrapping up sessions. So we're going to have to wrap up. Seriously, on the phone, if you're my friend, and my wife has this problem with me, I go, okay, I gotta go. And she's like, what? I have no ability to, I think it's part of my brain injury. Anyway.
Well, we didn't really get into the TBI and all that other stuff, but I thought it was still interesting.
What you gave us was gold, but what I wanted you to talk about a little bit is you're doing something really exciting. You had a personal transformation. You went from a big guy to not so big guy. I didn't want to say the fat word, but there, I said it. So, and you started to learn how to train other people to get in better shape. So I want to give you a chance to kind of talk about that and promote yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. So about 2 years ago, so I came home to an empty house. My wife and my daughter were gone. I had no clue where they were. And this was out of the blue. And I was devastated. I was really down on myself. It was a really dark time. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, dude, you got 2 ways to go right now. You can go crawl into a hole or you can try and become better. And I joined a gym that day. And I just, from that day, took a 1 step and 1 rep and 1 bite at a time. And in the past 2 years, I've lost 65 pounds, about 25% body fat. And I'm on a mission to help others. So I started a health coach business, a life coach business. You can follow me on Facebook at Dr. Shyam Health Coach. And I've been able to help a lot of people. And I'm different than a personal trainer. If all you want to do is lose weight, personal trainers are a dime a dozen. And they'll put you on a workout regimen. They'll tell you what to eat and you can lose weight. What I do, what I'm interested in is holistic overall well-being. So I work with people on things like emotional stability, relationships, communication, making yourself a priority, as well as fitness and nutrition. And now I'm shifting. I still have that part, but I'm stemming off to wanting to help people that have traumatic brain injuries, as well as non-injury neurocognitive disorders like Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I have published chapters in textbooks. I've published research journals on nutrition and brain function. And now I really want to capitalize on that for overall mental well-being, as well as now the fitness part, the physical well-being.
I think that's amazing. And so hopefully we'll get you some business through this.
I would love that. That'd be great. I don't know if should I post the name of my Facebook group or can you?
Sure.
Right in the chat, yeah.
Okay.
John, and our buddy John Mew is listening. Hey, John, thanks for tuning in.
How do we spell it?
Here, can I write it in?
Yeah, in the chat.
and
The comments, I think.
yeah. And I'm gonna do something at the end. While we're talking, I noticed Frank has his phone number next to his name. That is not for his business. I want everyone to make a prank call tonight.
Oh, thanks, Mike.
Oh, in the comments I can't. It doesn't let me type. In the private chat it does.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, we can put it in the show notes as well.
I got it. Yeah, that's what I'll put it in the show notes, but what else I will do is I will select this and banners ticker.
Is Doctor, is that
Nope.
your last name or first name?
Shyam's my first name.
Okay, last name?
Seetharaman. Should I type it in the private?
Seetharaman. Lebanese?
What's that?
Lebanese?
Indian.
Okay.
Oh,
There,
perfect.
you see it
There
there?
we go.
Oh, perfect. That's cool.
Facebook
Oh,
group.
But oh well.
What?
I spelled group wrong. It's group. Like I put an O instead of a P, but it doesn't matter.
Oh, maybe.
That's okay. It's group.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for stopping by, Sean.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, fascinating. Fascinating stuff.
Appreciate it. Same with you guys. I really enjoyed it.
We're gonna end the live. Don't go anywhere.
Okay.
And take care, everybody. Great
Bye,
seeing
John.
Everybody, thank you.
Bye.